I'm no tech genius, but I know if I want my business to crush it, I need a website now. Thankfully, Bluehost makes it easy. I customized, optimized, and monetized everything exactly how I wanted with AI. Within minutes, my site was up. I couldn't believe it. Plus, Bluehost keeps me protected 24/7. No more worrying about hackers. I just relax and focus on my customers. So whatever your hustle may be, secure your online presence in 2025 with Bluehost. Head to bluehost.com to start now.
Dear old work platform, it's not you, it's us. Actually, it is you. Endless onboarding? Constant IT bottlenecks? We've had enough. We need a platform that just gets us. And to be honest, we've met someone new. They're called Monday.com, and it was love at first onboarding. Their beautiful dashboards, their customizable workflows got us floating on a digital cloud 9. So no hard feelings, but we're moving on. Monday.com, the first work platform you'll love to use.
All right, we're recording and we're back with My Uncle's Escape Alcatraz with Ken and Mike, and lots been happening in the files releasing as we were talking about that earlier off camera. But we're going to talk about a few things today. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how Alcatraz has kind of captured the imagination for the past 60 years and has actually become like a brand. As we talked about that a little bit, but wanted to talk a little bit about, Ken, you did something right after our call or our podcast last week. So, and we talked about doing it, but, Cindy and I had well, maybe we should send, reach out to the White House and stuff like that. And you already beat us to it. So tell us what you did.
Well, first off, before I did the White House contact, I reached out to Joe Rogan's podcast, and it took him a while to kind of respond to me. And I just did it through an email.
Got it.
But while I was waiting for that response, which I didn't think was going to actually come, I was able to find his actual address in Austin, Texas. And so I wrote him not a really lengthy type letter, but I explained who I was and what I was trying to accomplish and what we were trying to do. And I actually sent him a signed copy of the book, and I sent it to him. He probably got it last week sometimes, or maybe a week before that. And I did hear back after I sent it from the email that I originally sent to the company, and they were very interested in the story. They were like, but we're not sure if we're going to be able to fit it in this year. And all I said was, I hope that, once he reads the book, if he has a chance, that might change his take on whether or not he wants to do it now or later. Because
do yourself a favor. Do you have any free audiobooks?
I do, and I can send that too.
I would email him that, because that's how he does it. He'll listen to it.
Okay.
He won't read it. He'll listen to it. He
I have found that out a lot by people. So then right after that, I started thinking, I get a lot of my creative juices flowing when I'm running every morning.
Sure.
And so I came in one morning and I said, you know what? I'm going to write a letter to President Trump. I mean, what's going to hurt? So I did the same thing. I wrote a nice little letter. I explained more in detail with him about my mom. I even included a picture of her for maybe some sympathy. And I signed the book to him, and I mailed it to him, to the White House. And they were supposed to have gotten it a couple of days ago. Yesterday, I almost freaked out because on my phone, I'm at the store and the phone rings and it's a number from Washington, D.C. I was like, oh my gosh, here's the president calling. But it wasn't. It was the RNC. So I was like, okay, that's not what I wanted. But, so you never know. I'm always one that will go the extra mile.
Sure.
I've always been taught, if you never ask, the answer is always no. So yeah. I am not afraid to ask anybody anything. Or so, he might might get the book and he might throw it on his desk, or he might throw it in the trash. I don't know, but at least I tried. So,
Can you share with us what you wrote?
I can. I told him that who my uncles were. I told him who I was, my uncles, and how that John and Clarence had really been separated from their family for over 60 something years. And I told him he probably could relate to the story of the Anglin family, the harassment that the FBI did to the family from 1962 to 79, and how that the U.S. Marshals basically kind of took over and continued the process. And so, I wanted him to know that there were other people out there that had been harassed by the same Department of Justice that he was harassed by. And I really wanted him to look at this case. And I told him, I said, if you really want to know what kind of persons John and Clarence were, if you read that book, if you had the chance to read the book, you would see they were not bad people. They really felt like they had been given a double jeopardy sentence. And, they were forced out of the country to survive. And really and truly, they've been in prison all this time because they've been separated from their family. And that, there's only 2 siblings of theirs still alive today that we know of. Well, my mom and her sister, but I don't know if either one of them are still alive. But I asked him to consider pardoning them. And if he would, my gosh, the amount of people that the Biden administration pardoned for the crimes that they did, I just cannot imagine why they would not even consider pardoning John and Clarence. So
yeah, they pardoned. Biden pardoned cop killers.
Yes, and John and Clarence were bank robbers. But like I said, I believe being separated from their family for over 60 years is punishment enough. And so, if they are still alive, and he would consider pardoning them, it might open the door for them to reach out and contact their sister. So
yeah, we knew this one guy when we were doing our Georgetown documentary. We met him, and he was on 60 Minutes and everything. He was from Nebraska, and he had robbed several banks when he was in his early 20s. And he obviously got thrown into federal prison, and he became basically a legal savant while he was in prison, and basically just started writing to Supreme Court briefs, to habeas corpus and stuff like that. And he was able to get himself out based on that. And he robbed several banks. He didn't hurt anybody or anything. He just robbed banks. And so he got out. Not only did he get out, after he got hired by a DC law firm, which deals with the Supreme Court and writes Supreme Court briefs, to write Supreme Court briefs because his were so amazing. Right. So it's like, it's not it's not unprecedented for something like that to be, he wasn't, not that he was pardoned, but the Supreme Court felt like his case, and he was actually caught and convicted for these several bank robberies, but he was able to get out. And I think he only spent, I can't remember how long, but he spent maybe like 7 or 10 years in federal prison for that. But because he didn't, wasn't a violent criminal or anything, he made a case for himself. So, your uncles were looking at life in prison,
basically, and probably even death once they got back to the state of Alabama. I still believe to this day, if they had only received the federal time, they would have served their time out in Atlanta with their other brother, Alfred. They would have been paroled. None of this would have ever happened. But it was the fact that the state of Alabama came in and threw another 25 years on top of their federal time. And then, of course, threatening them with never leaving the state of Alabama alive. I believe that is what really forced them into, okay, we got to get the heck out of Dodge.
Yeah.
And so I really believe that they had just received their federal time, none of this would have ever happened. There would not have been an escape from Alcatraz.
Well, and John was sent to Lewisburg and tried to escape, or was in the process of planning an escape attempt and gets caught gets sent back to Leavenworth, or gets sent to Leavenworth, I should say, and reconnects with Clarence. And then Clarence tries to escape, most likely with John's help, gets caught, and then goes to Alcatraz. And of course, we know the rest of the story. So ever since they're convicted, they've only had one idea on their head, and that's get out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, because they were looking at the double time. That's, you know,
Right,
looking,
right.
you know,
They had no intention of doing that time.
Yeah.
No, none. And even in the FBI report, when it lists the different criminal acts and charges that they have for each one, there's a very interesting line on Clarence's where when he's in the jail in Alabama after the state trial, waiting to be transferred to Leavenworth, he tries an escape right then.
Mhm.
And it doesn't say an escape. It says there was suspicious activity with him, and it actually delayed his transfer to Leavenworth while they investigated. It would not surprise me he was already planning to get out right then. I mean, what easier, path to get out of a local jail versus a federal penitentiary. So I'm sure his gears were running while they were sitting in prison or in that jail, waiting as they went through the trial, looking around. Okay, how can we get out of here?
And there's actually one other element I just remembered, and that is a year later, after they're convicted, there's a court order to destroy all the evidence from the bank robbery case. A year later.
But why?
There was a judge's order to destroy the evidence, and then there's a follow-up that says the evidence has been destroyed, because Alfred, when he was appealing his case with the ACLU, obviously needed that evidence to help his case, and that's when he found out, it's all gone. So
I have a letter that he wrote to the state of Alabama when he was trying to put this information together for the ACLU, and he asked them for the records, and they rejected it at first. Said, "Well, you got to pay for it." And so, like copies of the
they did that. They do that.
So he sent it back, and then they responded and said, "Well, we've already had it destroyed." And we've even got the letter where they sent it to the U.S. Marshals, telling them to destroy all of the information.
Yeah, which is completely against the law. I mean,
Right.
because even we on our other podcasts we deal with Laura Brand. I mean, she deals with serial killers all the time. I mean, these guys have all their case files in their cell.
Uh-huh.
I mean, they're entitled stuff that no one else sees. The only other people that sees it is like the prosecution. So they have, and
They're entitled to have all their records.
they're entitled to have all their
But
records.
also, when we were working on a missing persons case that was pretty high profile in Florida, the police department who was handling Jennifer Kesse, who went missing from Orlando, and at that time, and I'm not saying anything because we have a lot of friends in law enforcement in Florida, we work with them quite a bit, but on Jennifer's case, it was mishandled from the beginning. And when her parents, for the past 15, 20 years now, have been trying to find her, they went and they requested the police files, and they were charged money to get the police files in their daughter's missing persons case because of how the case was mishandled in the beginning. They were trying to put every obstacle up that they could, just like with Alfred, just like with this case. I mean, they're putting up all these obstacles, but you have to wonder why. What exactly is here that you don't want us to know?
Yeah. And a lot of it is just they don't want to expose themselves for any kind of negligence or anything like that. But they charge them like $20,000 for like copying fees.
And this family had already exhausted all of their resources with lawyers, and I mean, it was a horrible situation. But what I don't understand is what would have been so glaringly detrimental to them in these files about the bank robbery.
I don't know.
Well, I think it was just that they just wanted to close the case and they never had a chance to get out. Bank robbery, we've talked about this before, bank robbery in Alabama, you could get the death penalty, and they almost did. It wasn't, if it weren't for the fact that they hired that private lawyer from the money that they stole from the bank that they gave to Uncle Man, who obviously got it to his father, who hired the lawyer, convinced the judge not to give him the death penalty, and they were given the 25 years each instead. And then, like I said, a year later, the evidence is destroyed. So their chance for appeal was gone at that point. There is no evidence for them to say this was a miscarriage of justice. So there's, it's not hard to figure out why John and Clarence are trying to escape, whereas Alfred, instead of escaping, he was still pursuing the legal route until he died. So, it was stacked against him from the beginning, and they made sure that stack never moved.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And an amazing thing too, a few years ago, I tried to, this was before I met Mike and we started on the book. I one time tried to reach out to the federal government to ask for a pardon, and I also reached out to the state of Alabama. I thought, well, I can, because when I reached out to the federal people, they told me, well, we can help you with the federal side, but we can't do anything about state. And so I wrote the state of Alabama and actually even spoke to someone there. And they, believe it or not, they have no information whatsoever on John, Clarence, or Alfred. They went back into all of their files. There are nothing on microfiche. There's nothing anywhere.
Yeah.
And I was like shocked. And I said to him, you mean to tell me that if John and Clarence showed up today, you would not arrest them? And they said, we don't have a retainer for that. There's nothing in their records for all three of the men.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting too, because it's like if they did escape and they went back, let's just pretend they went back to Alabama, they wouldn't have gotten in trouble.
No, they would not have. Well, they would have if they had stayed in prison, Alabama probably, but undoubtedly after the escape, as like Mike said, and then of course with Alfred, they undoubtedly destroyed everything, even every record concerning John and Clarence and Alfred. Every bit of it was gone. They destroyed everything because they have nothing in their archives, nothing in their files. And so if John and Clarence were captured today, the state of Alabama could not put them in prison because they do not have anything on them.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is that the fact that the state of Alabama was going for the jugular like that. I mean, that town, I've seen video. I mean, someone put together a little YouTube thing about that town and the bank robbery and stuff. That town is so small. That bank was probably the size of not even a 7-Eleven. I mean, it was tiny. It was tiny. I mean, you saw the vault. I mean, it was a shoebox. And the fact that, these guys, I mean, they got away with $19,000 back then. Yeah, that seemed like a lot of money back there, but it was they didn't hurt anybody. They walked in, they walked out, they helped someone who, was not feeling well. I mean, they weren't malicious, and they just walked in and walked out. So it's it was
with a toy gun.
With a toy gun.
Right.
And so the fact that they were going for, they were asking for them, and in their courtroom, like you said, that John was freaking out because your family was freaking out because they were talking about lynching him. It was like they wanted to hang him for that offense. I mean, it just tells you what it was like in the times down in that area. I mean, it's that's ridiculous. It's a theft. It was the money was, I think I believe the FDIC was involved at that point. So the money was completely insured. Yeah, so it's not like no one lost money, and they got the money was returned after the fact, or a portion of it. So they got most of it back. So it's the fact that they were going to 25 years to whatever, and then they were actually seeking the death penalty initially is ludicrous.
Well, and the federal government, when they tried them, they undoubtedly didn't consider it to be, I mean, it was a crime, but they didn't consider it to be, oh my gosh, we got to put them to death. I mean, John only gets 10 years, and Alfred and Clarence got 15 years. But it was only because they had 5 additional years added because they were already on the run. So the federal government looks at it, which to me, I would have thought this was a federal issue anyway. I mean, this
exactly,
is a bank, right? This had nothing to do with state. And so the federal government goes in and says, hey, okay, 10 years, 15, and John and Clarence and Alfred were happy to have that. I mean, I think they consider that to be a win for them because they all three pleaded guilty, and they were willing to go back to federal prison, to Alabama, to Atlanta, and then all of a sudden the state of Alabama gets involved, and charges him basically for the exact same thing. I mean, charges him for robbing a bank in the state of Alabama and, holding someone against their will. But that's the reason why they felt like, wait a minute, even their public defender in the federal trial was quoted as saying he felt like it was double jeopardy also. He did not feel like this was a correct thing for the state of Alabama to do.
So like you said, I mean, if they got 10 years federal prison, they probably would have been out in maybe 7.
Yes. Well, with Alfred Duke getting 15 years, he left the prison after 5 years. So now I know he was involved in that drug program, but still, you could probably say John would have probably been out within a few years.
Yeah.
I mean, he only had 10, whereas they had 15. So if he was able to leave that prison after 5 years, I'm sure John probably would have left a lot earlier. And I can almost see this public defender, and that's the reason why they took this deal, he basically probably told them the exact same thing. You're going to go away. You're going to serve some time. You're going to go to a federal penitentiary. Do your time. Keep your nose clean, and you'll be out before you know it.
And then for the state trial, or it wasn't a trial, because they'd already pled guilty for the federal. It was 3 weeks later. 3 weeks later,
right? They
go to court, and they're, obviously they're already guilty, and then they're sent to prison after that. 3 weeks. That would never happen now, because you would need months and months and months to prepare your defense and get ready for the second trial, and they barely had any time to do that. So again, it's just the idea that Alabama just had it in for them. They wanted them.
Oh yes.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, we're talking early 60s.
Oh, of course. Yeah. This is late 50s Alabama.
Yeah. Alabama.
Yeah.
Not
deep,
tough
deep
times
South.
down there.
That's
it was definitely the good old boy system there.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And because back then, still to this day, Louisiana, they have real-time sentencing. So you get 75 years, you do every day of those 75 years. They don't play around with that. So, but yeah, well, kudos to you for reaching out to the White House. Keep us up to date on that. I know you will. And then,
if he reaches out to me, I'll ask him if he'll come on the podcast with us.
Oh, okay,
yeah. Sure.
Yeah. Some tells me you're going to get a response.
Never know.
I think you'll definitely get a response.
Yeah, for sure.
As far as Rogan, keep me updated on that, because I have some other connections on the sideline, because I was one of the original producers of The Ultimate Fighter, so I know a lot of people in the UFC and stuff like that. So maybe I can go around and see what happens. Just send me the information, the person you contacted, and their side. Just curious.
I will do that.
See if we can kind of escalate it a little bit based upon what we're doing right now and trying to get answers.
So it's interesting that they're releasing these JFK files, because this connection to the Alcatraz case has always fascinated me. And I was digging, trying to see if we could find any other information about anything. I just think it could, maybe something in these files could come out.
Yeah.
That could link to some of the information that you guys have found. Why don't we refresh people's memories about what you guys did find connecting Alcatraz to the JFK assassination?
Probably the biggest, and I've said this from the very beginning, the biggest piece of the puzzle was finding out that Mickey Cohen was involved in the escape. That I don't know if it was that he financed the boat, he supplied the money that allowed them to get whatever boat they had to pick them up, or whether or not it was actually his boat. He was involved in it. And once you started digging into Mickey Cohen, you started looking at, okay, he's the only person in the history of Alcatraz to leave the island, other than not in a box or because he had served his time. He bonded out. And then as you started looking out, how did he get bonded out? Then we uncover that the Supreme Court justice, the chief justice, is the one who signs his bond to get out. So as I started digging in, and Mike and I both did this, we started uncovering, okay, well, he had a girlfriend by the name of Candy Barr, or that was her stage name. She was a stripper. He was in love with her. He actually, hid her out while she was getting ready to go to prison for drug charges. Hid her out at his farm in Mexico. So there's this connection there. And then she's the one who introduces Jack Ruby to Mickey Cohen. So now all of a sudden I'm going, wait a minute, what does Jack Ruby have to do with this? And so, now you've got this relationship between a Supreme Court justice, Mickey Cohen, Candy Barr, which is a stripper, and now you've got Jack Ruby involved in this connection.
And we know that Jack Ruby was connected to the Chicago mob and the New Orleans mob. I mean, he was connected. He was a connected person.
Right. So then you have Candy Barr, who comes in and says right after the shooting that Jack Ruby and Oswald came to her house a few days before the shooting. They had just got back, or they had gotten back from Mexico. So both of them were in Mexico at the same time. They come by her house. She doesn't know Oswald. She didn't know who he was. But later she recognized him after seeing him on TV. So, several days later, you have the assassination against John F. Kennedy. They identify, of course, they capture Ruby. Not Ruby, but Oswald. And then Ruby kills him. Now, why would he kill someone he was just in the car with a few days before that? And he goes to prison and everything is silence. Now, Oswald is quoted as saying before he is let out of that police station that there is way more involved in this than just him.
Yeah.
Sure. And what happened to Candy Barr after that?
Well, so Candy Barr was scheduled to go to prison, and the governor of the great state of Texas, who was sitting in the front seat with JFK, who gets shot as the bullet passes through, the magic bullet that passes through John F. Kennedy's throat and into his back. He is the governor, and after Candy Barr, I don't know how long after, she changes her story about that no one was with Jack Ruby when he came to her house. She's pardoned by the governor of Texas, John Connally. He pardons her. Now, if you were to look at a picture and draw the connections between everything, you've got Mickey Cohen, who is related to the story of Alcatraz. He's the one who supplies it. He's related somehow to the Supreme Court justice. He's related to Candy Barr. He's related to Jack Ruby. And, Jack Ruby's related to, and Candy Barr has a direct relationship to Oswald.
Yeah.
You tell me what you think happened.
Well, and also Mickey Cohen was the recipient of the Kennedy's wrath.
Yes.
In the war against crime.
Yes.
On organized crime.
It's a total motive right there. I mean, the fact that they were, they're the ones that put Mickey Cohen in jail in the first place, and they were cracking down on organized crime. It was very controversial at the time. I mean, it always kind of makes sense that the mob would have gone after JFK.
Yeah. Well, I heard
now, six years later, in 1968, when Bobby Kennedy was running for president, he was infamously assassinated at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. Well, the Ambassador Hotel was Mickey Cohen's base of operations. That's where he did his business. That's where he entertained. He knew people. He did things. And Kennedy, most likely knowing this, was kind of thumbing his nose at Cohen, saying, "I can be anywhere and I'm safe." And You can't touch me. And then, of course, he's killed. And again, under very mysterious, questionable circumstances. I mean, Sirhan's, he's still in prison, isn't he?
Yep.
He's still alive.
I actually saw him in Corcoran State Prison in 1999.
Yeah.
And he still to this day denies that he remembers ever doing it.
Well, yeah. And then Bobby Kennedy Jr. has also said it wasn't his bullet that killed his dad. There was another shooter. Right. So there's that too. But what I want to play is I sent you guys, I saw something that came up on TikTok, and there's a gentleman who spends a lot of time analyzing the JFK theories and files and stuff like that. And this came out literally right after they declassified the files. And I thought it was really interesting because it kind of connects the dots on what you guys are saying as regards to Lee Harvey Oswald in Mexico. So I'm just going to play the audio here, and then we can talk about it. But it was when I saw it, it was like boom, and I sent it to you guys right away. So for audiences here.
Oh, sheet.
Honey, chill. It's just laundry.
Not that. I'm talking about these Arm & Hammer Power Sheets. All the power of Arm & Hammer laundry detergent in a convenient tossable sheet.
Oh, sheet.
That's what I'm saying.
And Arm & Hammer Power Sheets deliver an effective clean at a great price. Think of all the laundry we'll do.
And all the money we'll save. Oh, sheet.
Arm & Hammer, more power to you.
That we know now that we did not know before as a result of files that have already been released. We know the name of a secret undercover CIA officer who investigated the possibility that Cuban exiles were behind the assassination of JFK, and that report has never been released. We now know the identity of the CIA officer who was in charge of reading Lee Harvey Oswald's mail for years before the assassination. We know who the CIA agent was in Mexico City who said she took pictures of Lee Harvey Oswald coming and going from the Mexico City embassy, which directly contradicts what the CIA's official story was. And we know that a CIA whistleblower described himself seeing something that he called disturbing still within the possession of the CIA, including a video cassette labeled Lee Harvey Oswald in Mexico.
So Lee Harvey Oswald was in Mexico when he went to Mickey Cohen's house to see Candy Bar.
When he crossed paths.
Yeah, well, think about this. So, you've got years and years later after all of this, you've got someone by the name of Fred Breezy, who basically, as he's meeting with the Anglin family, says that when they left San Francisco or when they left California, they were on a plane. They had an airplane, and that they landed just north of Mexico City, where they were refueling up their plane. Well, first of all, where were they going? And Oswald, who was down there near Mexico City, we've always believed, and in fact, I think even Alfred in the FBI files identifies a region, an area that he believed that they went to, which is just outside of Mexico City. So I have always believed that if Jack Ruby was with Lee Harvey Oswald in Mexico, I believe part of the plan was that they were going to hide him out at wherever this farm is that Mickey Cohen owned. The same farm that he hid Candy Bar out in. I mean, when you listen to, or when you read what he gave Candy Bar when he took her down to Mexico, he gave her an ID, he gave her cash, and I believe it's even said he gave her clothes. She basically just walked out, Well, according to Fred Breezy, that's the exact same thing that John and Clarence and Frank Morris had when they got to the bank. John tells them that they had cash waiting for them. They had new clothes, an ID, and a passport waiting for them when they got to shore. That's the exact same thing that Mickey Cohen supplied candy bars. And lo and behold, what are they doing deep in Mexico, just north of Mexico City? This is the same area. So I always kind of believed, as we were putting this together, that, I believe Oswald took the shot at Kennedy. I don't believe he killed him. I believe he was going to try to kill him. I've always believed there was somebody else that was involved, just in case he screwed up and didn't make it. And it was probably the plan that he was going to be ferried out of the U.S. by Jack Ruby. He winds up getting caught. And, of course, you hear him start singing, "Oh, if you just knew who else was involved." And, of course, then he had to be silenced.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No, he was a disruptor, Kennedy. I mean, and he made no bones about it. He was saying what he was going to do. He wanted to dissolve the CIA. He wanted to do a lot of things that the establishment government didn't want happening. And
he did not want to be in Vietnam. He was going to be pulling out of that. They did not want that. And of course, you saw Johnson, when he comes in, not only does he ramp it up, I mean, he basically we got into Vietnam because of him. I believe that JFK would have pulled us out, and that would have been the end of the conflict.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, organized crime was working with the government, maybe not publicly, but behind the scenes. I mean, they always were working together. At some point, they had to coexist.
Well, no, I mean, I was watching another podcast, and it was Michael Frenzy, or it was with Piers Morgan, and they were, and Michael Frenzy, he was a mobster. He spent, I think, like 10, 15 years, maybe 20 years inside but his father was one of the original guys, and was connected, and was sent to prison by the Kennedys, during around the same time as Mickey Cohen. So there was no love lost there. And he pretty much said, he goes, yeah, there was a lot of people gunning, for them. And you go back to the old story of, Joe Kennedy, JFK's father, who was a rum runner during the Prohibition eras, and was connected to a lot of these guys still. And they were, and made a deal with them for him with the unions in Chicago. And this is, this is all common knowledge now, to get his son JFK into the White House. And so they made a deal, and they felt like it was reneged on after he got in the office, and that they were going after the people that got him into office. So it was like, can't do that. And then on top of that, you had the establishment government, like, this guy's going to create a lot of problems for us if he dissolves the CIA and doesn't let us go to our war, because we have all these industrial military complex that's just standing, waiting in the wings, and they're all whetting their appetite about how much money they're going to make on, all the, military supplies and napalm they're going to be able to do, and how long we can drag that out. Sound familiar? Right. This is all stuff that, we've been dealing with for the past 20 years.
I mean, and last night when, I was listening to the Ukrainian president on, I used to work for a French television news station, and I was listening to the American version versus the French version. And he was saying many times that, like, if he had just been given the weapons that he needed, this war wouldn't have happened in the Ukraine. But it's almost like, well, they kind of want it to happen. At some degree. I mean, there's something not right here. And I think that during Vietnam, JFK, they did not want that war to happen. And I mean, I think you're right. I think he would have stopped that war, which would have been wonderful.
Which would have been devastating to the military complex.
Right.
Yeah.
But it would have been wonderful for the people that
a lot of the technology that they created out of that war. I mean, they came out with a brand new tank, new helicopters. It's like you said, they were using napalm, something.
But look at all the life that was lost.
Test, and they had the
unnecessarily
battlefield to test it on.
Right. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on here that we don't, we're not privy to as the public, which I think now is all trying to be exposed, and things are all connecting to each other. But the other thing that I never really understood is, like, we'd mentioned, but briefly once before, is that other people had escaped from Alcatraz and it wasn't a big deal.
You're exactly right.
So what's the big deal about these two?
Right. I mean, if you go back and look at the two individuals who escaped, I believe one of them was Cole, I can't think of the other person's name, but I looked up their FBI file. It's not very long. I mean, it's very short. I just can't. I mean, why in the world did they spend this amount of time on John and Clarence and Frank Morris?
And also,
I can't remember any other escape that they've done that with.
No. And there are rumors that, these people survived, didn't survive, whatever, but they went to Brazil to look for your uncles.
Mm-hmm.
They went to Brazil. Why would they bother? If they really thought they were dead, why would they bother going all the way to Brazil to try to find them?
And two, the way that Jim Bolger, Whitey Bulger, said that when they went to Mickey Cohen, when it was known he was going to get out, and basically told him, don't come back, flee to Brazil, marry a local, have children, they can't bring you back. I was looking at the files of Mickey Cohen, and they suspected when he got out that he was going to leave the country. In fact, they had put up people guarding the borders because they expected Mickey Cohen to leave, which he didn't, which was kind of very strange. And then I found one of the reports where after he was ordered back to Alcatraz, he had lost his case. He was sitting in a jail, a local jail, county, whatever jail in Los Angeles. They were trying to do another appeal, and they were going to offer him, he could stay right where he was at while they do this. And he said, nope, I want to go back to Alcatraz. He requested to go back to Alcatraz. Why would he request to go back to Alcatraz? Is there something he wanted to deliver message-wise? I don't know, but just strange that he had the offer that he could. I mean, it's listed in this file. He had the chance to stay where he was at in a county jail. And he said no. He wanted to go back to Alcatraz.
Well, I guess he wanted his room with a view and the better food there. I don't know. I mean,
well, if he had information he wanted to pass to John, because you got to remember now he's working with John before he leaves in the clothing room. He leaves for 7 months. He comes back. He goes back to the clothing room with John, and the escape occurs a few weeks later. John changes the boat that's another thing that just blows my mind. So they had this boat that was ready to go. I mean, it was ready to go. And for whatever reason, as Mickey Cohen comes back, they said, no, we got to have a different boat. And in fact, as Mike had even commented before, it was all the way up to that very night they were still working on it. I mean, why would you chance you had a perfectly good boat that was ready to go, but for some reason they needed this other boat? And we find out why, because they needed the ability to tie something to the front of that boat. They needed an eye. And we know that existed because when the officer from Alcatraz who finds the boat, they tie up to it and pull it. So it had the ability to be tied to. The boat that they left behind did not have that.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, it's like when you look at it and you put it up on a, like what we call like a case board or a murder board and stuff like that, the connections are limitless. And I'm sure you guys have done this exercise quite a few times. So Mike,
if you do the string theory with this, forget it. It all ties back to just one little group of people.
Exactly.
And it's like the motive is very clear. I mean, Mickey Cohen he trusted these guys because of Fred Breezy, and he wanted them to do his marijuana deal. Mm-hmm. They wanted them, look, you can grow marijuana, please go do it. You know, this was a different time.
I mean, because there's no honor among thieves. They want, it's quid pro quo.
Right.
Everything.
They weren't just going to do it out of the kindness of their heart. They obviously wanted something from them.
And
they knew about it. See, that's the thing too. Like Clarence and John knew about this marijuana operation. Mm-hmm. So it behooved him that they already knew about it. If he gets them out, they're not going to tell anyone. He could trust them.
Well, and years later, Fred Breezy was flying out of Central and South America with his planes filled with drugs. It wasn't just doing it in Mexico; he was doing it further south.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And when he crashed in 1973, he was coming from, I think, Colombia, I believe.
It was Colombia.
Yeah, which is just north of Brazil.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So
and where did he go? Didn't he crash in Florida?
Yes, he crashed actually just outside of Ruskin in a little area called Waimama, which is right down from where the cemetery is, where all of the Anglin members are buried, a lot of them. There's a little grassy runway, and that's where he would land his planes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's literally right now out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
I mean, I've ridden by by that location and looked at that runway, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's like, I can't even imagine someone trying to land a plane here, but it's still there today.
In Florida, there's a lot of those grass runways all over the state. I mean, a lot of with the amount of drugs that come in to Florida via plane or boat, and they use these submarines, cartel submarines, these things that look like they're about as big as a boat, but they're submarines. They go just below the waterline. I mean, it's crazy.
Well, and so a lot of people sometimes, and I used to think this when I first learned of Breezy, and they said, oh, he's a drug runner. I sometimes used to think, okay, it's the kind of person, go down into Mexico and you bring back a couple pounds and you're selling it to your friends, or I mean, I was a teenager. I remember people that when I used to smoke. Yes, I did used to smoke marijuana.
You did inhale
a long time ago. You had friends and they had a couple of pounds that they got from somebody that probably went into Mexico, and so that's what you kind of think of when you think of Fred Breezy and this drug running. This guy had a huge operation.
Yeah.
I mean, when he crashed his plane, he had 600 pounds on his plane.
Well, that's the thing too. Don't you think? But don't you think that the CIA would have known about this?
Oh,
they totally knew about this.
Yes. I mean, this wasn't like he was going down, like I said, and getting a couple of 100 pounds, getting a pound or so. I mean, and you think about him going into Colombia, you had to have a contact. You wasn't going up to someone's house and knocking on the door going, hey, can I buy some marijuana from you? It's like,
no,
you would have gotten killed. So, this was a huge operation, and he wasn't the only one flying. They actually caught, I've got a newspaper article where they caught one of his other associates, and he had over 1,200 pounds on his plane.
Yeah.
It was a big deal. I mean, remember that?
It was a huge operation.
Yeah.
He had multiple planes.
Yeah. There was a lot of people doing these things at that time.
Yeah.
So, you stop and you kind of think about this too, Fred Breezy he was not the kind of person that could have set something like this up on his own.
No.
I mean, he was a regular, ordinary person. This was an operation that was being run by someone else. He was not the head of the operation.
No.
I believe he was probably over a lot of the flights that occurred, but he was not the head person.
No, he was transportation, and usually, yes. I mean, they don't really involve the transportation into the inner workings. You fly here, someone's going to load the plane, you fly back to the United States. Right. That's it. That's all they know. It's just how they kind of divide.
And it wouldn't have been hard in Florida for him to have met someone that would have hooked him up with that kind of job.
No. So I always believed he was part of the Mickey Cohen operation. Mickey Cohen was doing this even before he got in trouble. It was known for him doing this out of Mexico into California. He even had some of the law enforcement in California on his payroll looking the other way while his planes landed with this stuff. Yeah. So, I've always believed that Whitey Bulger somehow took over part of this operation. Why in the world would Whitey Bulger go all the way deep into Mexico and into, just outside of Mexico City himself?
Mm-hmm.
Now, we have a picture of him in Mexico in 1973. So explain to me why a Boston mobster would be deep in Mexico.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I don't know what the legality in that, because he was a federal felon. Was he even allowed to leave the country?
I don't know.
Maybe it was different back then, but
he was down there in 19.
Usually you don't get a passport.
Yeah, usually not allowed to leave the country.
I could be wrong. I don't know.
I don't know.
Well, in 73, was he a wanted fugitive in 73? I don't think he was.
That was before he did a 16-year run.
Yeah.
That was before.
Yeah. So this was before this was actually 73 was probably while just as he was starting, his gang, his Winter Hill gang. Yeah. So it was probably in the early parts of as he became who he became.
Yeah, but he was still a federal felon.
He was. You would think that he wouldn't be able to leave the country, but he did. So did he travel?
I've had family members. I've had family members. They were, they couldn't even go to Canada.
Right.
And this is recently. If they had like a thing that happened to them when they were 18, and they're in their 40s now, and it was still on their record. And, it wasn't even a felony, but they spent a little bit of time in jail, and they wouldn't let him in Canada.
Right.
Yeah.
There's just so much, like, if you were going to go down into Mexico at that time frame, you had to know who you were going to see.
Oh,
yeah. Going down there on vacation.
No.
It's like John and Clarence in 1962. They're flying
a plane Brazil
down into Mexico. First of all, how'd they even know where they were going?
Exactly.
Whoever was flying them in that plane, how did they know where they were going? How did they know they could stop at this particular place and get gas for their plane? I mean, it's not like they landed at some major airport,
Yeah.
So you undoubtedly landed at some obscure runway. I mean, you just don't land a plane in Mexico and walk up to someone and say, "Hey, I need gas for it." I mean, all of this was planned. I mean, this was a route that whoever was flying them had flown before.
I want to go back to Fred Breezy a little bit, because I remember in the book, and correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a little while since I've read the book, is when Fred met your uncles and they became friends. I think the thing that they met him at that swimming hole or whatever there
on the Alcatraz River.
The Alcatraz River. They became friends. Fred's family had obviously wasn't as poor as your uncle's family and your family.
Right.
And then Fred's father didn't like him hanging out with the brothers, because they were obviously getting in trouble, was that correct? And so he sent him to pilot school to kind of.
He did. Well, he got into trouble early on. They did leave Ruskin while he was young.
They went to New Mexico. Okay, yeah. So exactly. So it was at that point when they were in New Mexico that Fred Breezy, now that he had a pilot's license, connected with someone in the Mickey Cohen organization or some sort of periphery, because that's in the story in the book. That's how it kind of connects, and then he comes back and he sees these guys. I can't remember, and then says, "Hey, listen, I may have an opportunity for you. I think, and that's how the connection happens."
Yeah. So Fred Breezy, in a nutshell, he meets the brothers at a very young age. They're like adolescent type kids, 8, 9, 10 years old. He leaves for a short time. Their family goes to New Mexico. His father is working on the dam just north of Tucumcari, New Mexico. Which I've actually been to that dam, crazy. But anyway, he eventually comes back to the Ruskin area. He starts getting into trouble with a young guy he was hanging around with, and probably the Anglin kids at the same time. They actually wound up going to boys' reform school together because they had actually gotten in trouble multiple times. And at some point in time, as he's growing up, his father decides, I got to get you away from these Anglin brothers, these Anglin boys. They had a very bad reputation. My mom said that everybody in the whole county or the whole little town, if anything was stolen, anything happened, they always blamed it on the Anglin boys. And so, I mean, it's not a far-fetched stretch for his father to say, "Hey, I don't want you to have anything to do with them." And he was already getting into trouble himself. So he earns his pilot's license, and he goes back to New Mexico to visit a friend of his that he knew while he was there for several years during the time his father was helping work on this dam. And that friend is the one who introduces him to Mickey Cohen. That's how he meets Mickey Cohen. And then, of course, he's still friends with Johnny Clarence. And as he's meeting Mickey Cohen, he remembers, or, he has this bright idea of saying, "Hey, I've got friends back in Ruskin that are absolutely fantastic farmers all their life. My mom has told me that John and Clarence could grow anything. They had a green thumb. If you didn't believe that something could be grown, they could do it." And so then you start going, okay, wait a minute. I know they got in trouble with my grandfather by growing marijuana because he caught them. And this was when they were in their late teens. So clearly something had changed, that they didn't want to just grow, tomatoes and oranges and crops that they were selling at the farmer's market. They got into growing marijuana.
Yeah.
Now you go into Fred Breezy. Fred Breezy, we know at an early age had gotten into moving drugs. And you just have to kind of go back to, why would John and Clarence and Alfred go all the way to California? Who are they meeting in California?
Yeah.
And we could never figure out why would they travel to California in the mid 50s, like 1956, 57. Why would you go to California? It would be years and years later when we tie in Mickey Cohen.
Yeah.
The FBI ties him to this escape. Now it starts kind of making sense.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason why I said finding out that Mickey Cohen was involved in this was like a game changer.
Yeah.
Now it made sense why John and Clarence and Alfred went to California. And, why would Mickey Cohen risk anything to participate and help John and Clarence? What was the motive for that? Why would he help someone he didn't know?
Exactly. He's not going to do that.
He's not going to do that.
No.
He had the opportunity to leave this country and never go back to prison, and he elected to go back and help two individuals that he didn't know.
No, it's ridiculous. No. It's just not plausible.
No.
Yeah. And also, I mean, it's very rare you saw like a mobster just go on the run. They don't run. I mean, think about it. They all had the means to run. They could go to other countries, but they didn't run. I mean, how many times?
And then you have Fred Breezy, who comes in 1992. He adds more pieces to this puzzle.
Yeah.
He talks about the plane and them flying to Mexico. He talks about the boat that pulled John and Clarence, the prison boat that he wasn't supposed to know about. He knew about. John tells him about the ID and all this information that they had when they got to shore. The same thing that he gave Candy Bar when he took her to Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Fred Breezy's saying they had a plane. They're flying into Mexico. First of all, like I said, they had to know where they were going.
Right.
And Fred Breezy is the only one, as he's telling the story, he doesn't give this general the next morning they land their plane and they get fuel and then they're heading to Mexico. No, he gives a time. He said at 9:00 the next morning. I mean, the only way he knew what time it was, he had to be there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He was the one flying the plane. He knew what time it was that they landed and refueled. And then he even corrects himself and says, well, actually, it was 10:00 back home because of the time difference.
Yeah.
So, no, he was actually there. You don't give that kind of detail if you were not the one flying that plane.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think if we deep dive more on Mickey Cohen, I think we'd find a lot more.
I think so too.
I think really do. And I think that's kind of the next step here as far as trying to get a hold of, an expert on that part of the mob. There's a guy who used to, I have to call him. I was working with him on something else. He's an author, but he was part of the LAPD intelligence during the early 60s. And he's written a bunch. He was a young man. He got I don't know how he got into that, but he's written about, the Marilyn Monroe death, with RFK, and stuff. He's got quite a few books out about this stuff, but I got to check in with him because he probably knows stuff about Mickey Cohen. So I'll reach out to him. But once again, we're getting to the bottom of this, and keep me posted on the Rogan thing. See if he responds to you. Send me the person or the
I will
email.
send that email to you.
Yeah, and then I'll see if I can shake a tree on this side.
And also, for the other stuff, we'll talk.
Yeah.
Okay, guys.
I think having all of us on the Joe Rogan podcast would be great.
We'll give it 3 hours.
Right?
It's a lot.
Oh, we have plenty for 3 hours. We're in what, episode 39?
Yeah.
I can see.
All right.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
That's good.
See you next week. Stay on for 1 second.